Greetings everyone, I'm Zach, and if you haven't had enough Spider-Man yet, here's another video about Spider-Man joining the MCU. Okay, hear me out. I get that some of you are sick of hearing this news already, but I get the feeling some of you will enjoy this video than most will. Instead of doing a video on why Spider-Man joining the MCU is a good thing, which it is, mind you, I mean, do I even have to say why at this point? I'm instead going to talk about some of the issues that could potentially affect Spider-Man joining the MCU in a negative way. What issues exactly? Well, I've nailed it down to 3, so let's talk about what they are. Now, one of the biggest complaints I've heard about the announcement is the recent change to the Phase 3 lineup. Specifically, that both Thor 3, Black Panther, and Captain Marvel, and even the Inhumans film, have all been moved back from the original dates, to accommodate Spider-Man's next solo film, which is now scheduled for a July 28, 2017 release. There are some out there who are downright livid at Marvel Studios for doing this, even proclaiming their actions to be both racist and sexist, mostly because of the 2 films I just mentioned, Black Panther and Captain Marvel. And while I personally call bullcrap on that argument, I have to admit, aside from the whole sexism and racism bit, there is another side of that argument that does hold water. The argument being that the Marvel Cinematic Universe doesn't necessarily need Spider-Man, and they're pretty much doing just fine without him. And yes, they have been doing just fine without him. Both the Avengers, Captain America the Winter Soldier, and especially Guardians of the Galaxy are proof of that. And bringing Spider-Man into the MCU, despite this being something that I've been wanting to happen for like forever, seems like a pretty big risk for Marvel to take. Probably the biggest risk they've taken thus far. This could potentially either go either way from Marvel Studios and Sony. It will either revolutionize the Spider-Man franchise and further strengthen the MCU as a whole, or it could potentially put both franchises at risk for failure, which is something I really hope does not happen. And much like everyone else, I'm sincerely hoping that Marvel doesn't shift all their focus onto Spider-Man. Don't get me wrong, I friggin' love Spider-Man. I've been a fan of the character since I was 7 when the first movie came out. But, in all fairness though, I just don't want Spider-Man to get all the attention. Not when there's still so many other great characters and stories left in the Marvel canon for them to explore. And I understand the concern people have with this, because when the MCU first started, Marvel didn't have a lot of their big-name franchises to make movies out of, so they had to go with guys like Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and so on to make their movies off of, which resulted in some creative thinking to get around the fact that they didn't have guys like X-Men, Fantastic Four, and up until recently, Spider-Man. But now that Spidey is being shared by Marvel and Sony collectively, we run the risk of Marvel relying a little too much upon Spider-Man in their films. Marvel's got a ton of other characters to choose from for their movies, and while I think it's friggin' awesome that Spider-Man is now in the position to be a part of all this, deep down, I still have my doubts and fears about this, like many logical thinking Spider-Man fans do. And then there's the origin story. Now I think at this point people already know who Spider-Man is. He's a guy that got bit by a radioactive spider, or genetically altered spider, depending on who the writer is, and gets superpowers. End of story. Okay, there is a bit more to him than that. I should know, after all, I am a Spider-Man fan. But I think after 5 movies, people have gotten the general gist of what makes Spider-Man, well, Spider-Man. In other words, as most people would say, no more origin stories. At all. If you have to do an origin story, just Incredible Hulk it. Have a flashback sequence in the opening credits, then pull a page out of the Spectacular Spider-Man's book and have Peter already into his superhero career, like say a year or 2 into it. Just whatever you do, do not do a full-on origin story, ever, because let's face it, mainstream audiences are not going to want to sit through that mess again. Which brings us to our final topic, who should be Spider-Man, this probably being the most controversial of the 3. Because of the last batch of Spider-Man films, people have grown tired of Spider-Man, or more specifically, Peter Parker himself. We've seen enough of his origin story twice already. There's no need to go back and retread some of the love stories or tragedies he keeps getting himself into. We need something new, something fresh, like Miles Morales. And to some extent, I do agree on that. We do need something fresh and new for Spider-Man in order to get this franchise up and running again. However, as I mentioned in both the last episode of the discussion, and even on my own blog, links of which you can check out here, by the way, putting Miles before Peter just wouldn't work, because whether people realize it or not, Miles is very intertwined to that of Peter Parker. In the comics, or more specifically the Ultimate Comics, when Peter dies, Miles witnesses what happened, and because of this, he decides to take up the mantle of Spider-Man in honor of Peter's legacy. Starting off with Miles Morales first before you establish Peter Parker would take away an important element that's part of Miles' character. Now, I'm sure there's probably a way to get around this, but for me personally, I'd rather save Miles for after they've killed off Peter. Which would be a pretty damn ballsy move for Marvel Studios to pull off if they did that. And don't even bother pulling the race card. I've got nothing against Miles' race. He is one of my top 5 favorite Spider-Man characters. I love the guy. I want to see the character done justice, as I would any other Spider-Man character. Now, with all that said and done, is Marvel Studios the best thing for Spider-Man right now? Personally, I'd say yes. But then again, it's not without its potential risks. This whole thing could easily make or break Spider-Man on the big screen again, and it's unclear at this point how Marvel and Sony will approach this new film series. All we can really do right now is hope for the best and expect the worst, so as far as I'm concerned, here's hoping we get the best out of this. Anywho, what are your thoughts on the subject? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys later. Take care.